I hope you were here last night and were able to join us. This is going to be a lot of fun. We've got another great conversation for tonight. We're so glad you're here. If you're watching with us right now on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you are, we've got some leaders there in the chat. They'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know where you're watching from right now. Last night we had people from Phoenix, Arizona, from Illinois, from Georgia. We'd love to know where you're at right now watching with us on all these different platforms. This has been so fun to reach out to so many different foster and adoptive families. And so we're glad you are here with us tonight. We've got a great conversation. I've actually got some new guests with me tonight in the studio here. So we've got a new panel of folks that are going to be with us tonight to talk a little bit as we get into some new conversation tonight. And so I want to take a minute, let them introduce themselves to you guys. So we're going to start at the far end with Julie. Will you let everybody know a little bit about your family and who you are?
Yeah, so good evening. My name is Julie Cooper. And I work with Trauma Free World over training and curriculum. And we do training with foster adoptive parents, social workers, teachers. So professionally, it's the idea of training amazing people who are caring for kids is dear to my heart. My husband and I are also foster parents. So we have 2 kids who joined our family through adoption from the foster system, as well as has had lots of foster kids in our home. So this is a subject that's dear to us both personally and professionally.
Yeah, thanks for being here tonight, Julie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Harold, will you tell everybody a little bit about your family?
Sure, I'm Harold Putman, and my wife and I have 4 kids. The oldest and the youngest are adopted. My son is 27 now. We adopted him when he was 3 days old, and then our youngest is she's 9, and she's been with us since she was about 2. We adopted her out of a foster care situation.
You got the whole gamut, 27 to 9. You've got the experience in the room here right now. That's great. That's great. Beth, tell us a little bit about your family.
My name is Beth Paricelli, and my husband and I have twin daughters who are 12 years old. We adopted them from the country of Haiti, and they came to our family when they were 9 years old. So they've been with us 4 years now.
Yeah, they're super cute too. Some of my favorites.
They are.
Well, we're glad to have everybody here. We're glad you guys are here watching with us online. I know it's so different in our world right now to be experiencing life and community in these different kinds of ways. But I'll tell you, it can be really great. And actually, Harold and I met on an online group that we were doing this summer at our campus and through some of our campuses, and it was for foster and adoptive parents. And what was that like for you, Harold? Just finding community. Why do you think that was so important to find community, even in these kind of unusual online spaces?
Well, I think it's been really helpful to hear from other adoptive parents and learn from all the research and resources that are available now. When our son we adopted in '93, and we didn't have a lot of the insight into brain chemistry and things that come from trauma that we can learn about now. And so being in that class really helped see how we can do a better job with our daughter and go at parenting 2.0, we call it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what we're here for tonight, hopefully, is we're all trying to learn a little bit more from each other, from folks like Julie, who's one of our experts here tonight, to kind of bring some knowledge. But yeah, I think that's one of the great things about just coming together in some of these spaces is no matter where you are and where you're watching from, there's some great stuff we can all learn from each other and from this. And Beth, I know last week we just kicked off our Foster and Adopted Moms Bible Study. Some of our groups are meeting in person. Your group met in person. What's that group been like for you? Why do you think it's so fun to meet with other moms and kind of connect on that level?
Well, first of all, it's necessary. So we were meant to live in community and to serve in community, and being able to meet with other moms who are on the same journey of being foster parents and adoptive parents is so important right now. We have a group that meets the 3rd Thursday of the month. It's just once a month, so we can all do that. Some ladies join us through Zoom and listen to a lesson, and if you're in the Louisville area, there are some groups that meet in homes. My group meets at my campus here at Southeast, and it's been so good to talk with other moms and be that community for each other.
Yeah. Well, we'd love for you guys to join in. We're going to put up a link right now to a lot of our opportunities. We've got some groups coming up in March that will be fellowships in person and online at a lot of our campuses. And the group that Beth was talking about, our Mom's Bible Study, they just kicked off last month, but they meet once a month. And so you can jump in now, get connected with them, find some community. And we've got lots of other great things that are be coming up this spring and throughout the summer and fall. So we'd love for you to get connected. This journey is unusual and challenging, and we want you to get connected and be a part of community as you do this together. I know all of us got a chance, Beth and Harold got a chance last night to join in the first night of Families Forever. Cameron Small was with us last night, and if you didn't get to watch that, if you're just joining us tonight for the first time, it's still there on Facebook and YouTube. Go back and find it. It was really powerful. What are some things you guys got out of that you thought was really powerful, really interesting?
I think so often in the adoption arena, we hear about one side of the adoption triad, and that is from the perspective of the adoptive parents. And so Cameron Small, being an adoptee himself and being a therapist and an adult, provides that perspective of the adoptee that we need to know as adoptive parents so that we can be educated and do better. And then I think what I loved most of all was his ideas for honoring and providing dignity to birth families and birth cultures.
Yeah. Harold, anything you thought that you took away from it?
Yeah, I was really challenged by just honoring the birth family and looking for ways to do that. It's not top of mind usually, and so it's good to be reminded that that's important.
Yeah.
And I know my son has had a great relationship with his birth mother, and we kind of helped facilitate that some, and it's been really good and powerful in our family. So
yeah, it was really good. I mean, I really do. If you haven't seen it, go back and check that out. It's a great resource. Cam mentions a lot of resources in there. We tried to put them all in the links last night. Lots of stuff you can go on and get connected to further. Tonight, I invited Julie Cooper from Trauma Free World to join us. We're going to really be focusing in on this topic of addressing anxiety. Mm-hmm. I really can't think of another topic I would have put on the agenda for 2021 than anxiety.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit just about why you think this topic is so important for us to focus on.
You just said it. It's always been important, and I think in this past year, it's even risen up higher. So, yeah, of course, us as the parents in the home have what we're dealing with, but for our kids, statistics just show us that our kids' levels of anxiety are higher than ever. And we see that. If you've got kids in your home, you see how that plays out, right? You see it in behavior, and you see it in emotions, and you see it in their schoolwork, and you see it in their bedtime. So it's really permeates all the areas of our life. I think it's worth understanding and worth figuring out how can we help our kids.
Yeah. So that's really what we're going to focus on tonight. And so just like last night, Julie took some time a couple weeks ago to put together a little presentation, kind of walking us through, how to recognize and see anxiety in our kids, and then some great strategies. And so we want you to check that out. Stick with us. Just like last night, we've got another opportunity for a door prize tonight. So you're going to see a link when we get back in the Q&A to join in and get involved in our door prize drawing later on. So stick with us. We'll be back live to do a Q&A, but feel free to chat in those questions just whenever they pop up. If Julie says anything that you're thinking about, curious about, throw that question out. They'll pass it along, and when we come back live in studio, we will get to those questions with you guys when we come back. But check out Julie's teaching on addressing anxiety.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Cooper, and I work for Trauma Free World. Thank you for joining us for this 30-minute session on disarming anxiety, understanding, recognizing, and responding to anxiety in our children and teens. And this has been a topic that has been incredibly important for a very long time. But in recent years, we've seen a rapid increase in the instances of anxiety in our children and teens. And definitely since the beginning of COVID, we've seen that go even higher, especially for our kids who've had their school and social rhythms disrupted, which definitely includes our high school and college age kids and young adults. So this is an important topic. And at the end of this 30 minutes, I trust that together we'll have greater awareness as well as some insight and skills for how we can help the children and teens in our lives, whether they be in our homes, in our schools, or in our church programs. So let's start by taking a look at a definition. I like this definition because it's rather vague, which serves us well. Everyone's experience with anxiety is unique. So this definition touches on some of those similarities and leaves room for the individual experience of the child or the teen in our lives. This is from Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who says that anxiety, it's a sense of unsafety and unease, right? The child is saying, I don't feel safe. I don't feel at ease. It's characterized by restlessness and apprehension, which is both cognitive and emotional. Now, the topic of anxiety has challenged the greatest minds for a long time. This is something that pediatricians and therapists have examined and tackled for years and years and years in order to understand how can we help kids? How can we help them deal with something that is so prevalent in their life? Anxiety has to do with our kids' alarm systems. When you see an anxious child or an anxious teen, you are seeing a child whose alarm system has gone off and they're in effect saying, I don't feel safe. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen any other kind of a training or heard any training on the effects of extreme fear and stress on the brain, but if not, I might encourage you to watch some training about that to get a better understanding of what is happening inside of our kids' brains when they're experiencing fear. What we know is that the fear center of our brain is here in the back. And then the good thinking and the really high ordered thinking is happening further up front. So when our kids are feeling anxious about something, we can't just try to speak to that front part of their brain that is actually not online because they're experiencing fear. For example, if I think that it's irrational that my child is afraid to ride the bus, and so I'm telling him, the bus, there's never any bus accident. There's no reason for you to be afraid of the bus. Stop acting like this. You know, I don't have time to drive you to work. You're going to make me late for work. We're trying to speak in a rational way to the front part of the brain when really that child is back in the back part of the brain in the area that is sending the message, I don't feel safe and I don't feel at ease. Something else we're going to talk about a bit more is that experience is actually felt in the body before it's perceived as an actual thought. So the feeling starts with either the heart rate beating or the tingly skin or the butterflies in the stomach. That occurs before the conscious thought that there's something that I'm anxious about. So we're going to talk in just a little bit about what we can do, but we're going to start with where it's first experienced. We want to start by addressing it in the body as opposed to addressing it immediately in the mind. Let's take a look at anxiety and its prevalence for our kids. Anxiety disorders are the most common psychiatric disorder in children and adolescents. And when I say psychiatric disorder, that sounds very pathological and very big. Lots of kids, lots of adolescents have struggles with anxiety, and it's never been diagnosed. They've never seen anyone necessarily about it. But what we know is that for our children and adolescents, between 15 and 30% of them will have a diagnosis of a psychiatric disorder. A diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. And that number 15, I can tell you, That correlates more with our younger kids, our kids under 12. And in our kids who are ages 13 to 18, we really are looking at closer to 30%, almost 1 in 3 kids between the ages of 13 and 18 will have some kind of anxiety disorder. And this comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Now, in contrast, our kids and adolescents, the rates of depression are between 10 and 20%, and the rates of ADHD between 8 and 10%. So we see that anxiety is extremely common. Now let's take a look at some of the common signs of anxiety. It may be that some of these are so obvious to you because you see them day after day, either in your home or in your classroom. Some common signs of anxiety: the stomach ache, the nervous tic, the muscle spasms. I find it helpful to let kids know that the reason that they have butterflies in their stomach is actually because their body thinks all of the blood needs to go to the muscles. So when our kids are in an alarm state, even if it's just something like riding the bus, it's not that they need to go and run from a wild animal, okay? But their mind is reacting and their body is perceiving it in the same way. That alarm state sends our blood to our muscles. Like, wow, we're going to have to do something. You're going to have action. And when that blood moves to our muscles, that means it's moving away from our stomach. And that lack of blood pressure, because the lack of the presence of blood around our stomach, is actually what we feel as butterflies in our stomach. It's because our blood is going elsewhere. And that also causes things like our bladder and bowels to relax, which is why sometimes kids feel like, oh gosh, I'm nauseous, my stomach hurts, and I'm going to have to go to the bathroom, which could be an entire other layer of something to be worried about. And we can just let them know, you know what? That's because your body thinks all your blood needs to go to your muscles. And there are ways that we can help put that blood back where it belongs and keep it all over your body and help keep you from feeling that way. So the nervous tics and the muscle spasms, again, that is that jolt of energy because of the way that the body is distributing its resources because of what it thinks is coming, even though, again, it might be just like, you're just going to ride the bus. What else do we see as common signs? We see in our kids just this constant sense that something is wrong, worry that something bad is about to happen. And some of our kids have very black and white thinking. Some of them have very exaggerated thinking. And so constantly in their mind, they're ruminating on these thoughts that something bad is going to happen, something bad is going to happen. Mom's not going to come home from work. Something's going to happen to me at school. And those thoughts, they ruminate constantly inside of their minds. They have an unrelenting feeling of nervousness. And I imagine you know what that likes. It's a universal experience. We all know what it's like to feel nervous. Some of our kids can't tolerate that feeling. That feeling of nervousness is so tied with bad outcomes to them that they cannot tolerate that feeling of nervousness. And so they're going to need help. We're going to talk about how to help them recognize what that is and gain some tolerance for that feeling of nervousness. Bad dreams. Okay, we know that the thoughts, conscious and unconscious, that have plagued our minds throughout the day can come out in dreams. We're going to see waves of panic, especially if we have kids who are operating kind of at a level 10 of anxiety, and we're trying to push them towards that thing. We very well may see kind of a wave of panic that just says, no, absolutely. Like, I cannot take this on. I cannot confront that. I cannot have that experience. We may see shutting down. So just completely our kids pulling in on the inside where it's safe not reaching out, isolating. And we also might see kids getting stuck. And this can either be during tasks or work. So the very anxious child at school may be looking at a math sheet and not have filled in one single blank for the entire 45 minutes of the test. And the teacher is thinking, I know this child knows how to do this. And the parent is thinking, I know the child knows how to do this. But the anxious child is stuck and cannot fill in any of the blanks. Sometimes we see this in our kids during play. So an anxious child during play may actually interrupt their play sequence and get stuck with something like organizing the toys, putting the Lego figures in color order, or some other kind of task. That you may see that at work as well. You may see that in our adolescents. That getting stuck is a sign of anxiety. There's more signs, but these are some common signs. So if your kids are showing you something you don't see on this list, we talked about how individual the experience of anxiety is. Don't think if something is not on this list that it is not real. It's not real in your house, or it's not real for your kids. Now, let's look, what are some compulsive anxiety reducing behaviors? Okay. The experience of anxiety is so uncomfortable for so many of our kids and adolescents. And honestly, for our adults too. We're talking about kids and adolescents, but many adults have the same experience. The need to relieve that anxiety and that stress is very strong. And we can see some behaviors that can look and become compulsive. One would be oral activities, sucking, chewing, biting, eating. And the reason is that when we activate our chewing and our sucking response, we are calming ourselves down. That's why babies have pacifiers, right? Or they suck on their thumb, right? So kids who are a little older that are chewing on a shirt or even chewing on the end of a pencil, nail biting, those are all anxiety reducing behaviors. Others are rhythmic activities and stimulation. And again, we see this in little ones who may be practicing self-soothing. We may see this compulsively in kids who have anxiety. And this may look like rocking, pacing, listening to music that has a beat. So something that's very rhythmic. It could be swinging. It could be something like watching waves. And if that's an anxiety reducing behavior, I claim that one right now. Watching waves is very relaxing. Stroking, so like stroking a bear, stroking a blanket, twirling your hair. It may even be something like masturbation, even in young children, but it's anxiety reducing and it becomes compulsive. Seeking comfort through contact with transitional objects. Again, this could be a teddy bear. This could be a picture of you. This could be a shirt that you have that smells like you, something that provides comfort with that child, but they're not just attached to it, they're overly attached to it to feel safe. I would even say, and we're going to talk about technology a little bit, I would even say that something like a cell phone definitely could be this transitional object. So many of our kids feel a sense of anxiety at any kind of impending separation. And that can be separation from us. That can be separation from peers. That no wonder their cell phone could provide such a sense of comfort. It feels like an instant at my fingertip connection when I need it. And so that could really be the object that is bringing our kids comfort and calm during anxious times. And then physical exertion, which is actually a great and it's a healthy way. When it becomes unhealthy, of course, if it turns into violence or even any kind of injurious self-harm. So something like cutting, right? When we have cutters, that cutting behavior, that also reduces chemicals that cause kind of a a different feeling, a different mood, a release from anxiety that produces some stress relief, but it isn't considered healthy. So this could go either way. All right, and finally, the use of drugs and alcohol. Again, always a major issue, especially for our adolescents. But again, I would mention that during COVID, the use of drugs and alcohol has gone up. It's gone up for our adolescents, but it's also gone up for our adults. And there's absolutely a correlation between our stress level and the stress level in the home, as you would imagine that there would be. So when we think about anxiety and we think about the coping behaviors that our kids are producing, the first thing we want to do is in our homes is we want to reframe anxiety. We want to reframe it, not that we are against anxiety and it is absolutely horrible. We reframe it to say, hey, you know what? Every human being has experienced anxiety. Our alarm system is actually a good thing. God created us with an alarm system to keep us safe. Sometimes our alarm system goes off when we really don't need it to. We can work with that, but it's not a bad thing. Our alarm system is good. Anxiety is normal, and it's actually good that we have it. It's better that we can experience it than if we never could and we didn't have that ability to have an internal alarm system. When we reframe anxiety and the experience of anxiety, we allow it to be normalized, and we also are able to focus in on what are the good reasons that we have it, and then how can we work to not have it overreact when we don't need it to, but still work for us when it's going to be for our benefit. Okay. So keeping that in mind, let's take a look at a major myth about anxiety. And this is the major myth. Anxiety is bad, and I should be able to eliminate or control my child or teen's anxiety. Okay, we just talked about how anxiety is actually not bad, but the experience of it for so many of our kids and adolescents has been bad that they equate it as bad. And they start to get that feeling, and their system becomes overwhelmed with it, overwhelmed by the pathway that their brain has created, that once I feel this way, boom, I go down this path and it's going to be bad. If I believe this myth about anxiety, that anxiety is bad, I should be able to eliminate it and control it from my child or teen's life, then there are some things that leads to, things that are unhealthy for us. And the first is, well, if I believe that, then something is wrong with my child. If anxiety is bad, we're having it, right? We're all having it. If it's bad, I'm having it, we're having it. Something is wrong with my child. Something is wrong with our family, which leads to shame, right? Shame says there is something wrong with me. And shame is a tool of the enemy. Shame is never what God has created us for. He doesn't want us to believe lies, right? He does not want us to believe the lie that anxiety is bad. If I believe that, then anxiety is bad. I have it. My child has it. I'm bad. Next, if I believe that myth, anxiety is bad, I should be able to control it. Well, guess what? I'm not controlling it very well, nor are you, or we wouldn't be here together. And that is more anxiety for me, the parent or the adult, because I'm failing. There's something I don't know. There's something I don't understand, or even worse, I just am not good enough to deal with this. Probably some other people are, but I don't have the capacity. God gave me kids he shouldn't have. God put me in a job he shouldn't have. I'm failing, which leads to more anxiety for me as an adult. And anxiety in our homes is cyclical. my child feels anxious, I take that experience on and I feel anxious, and my child picks up on my every cue, and my child feels more anxious and I feel more anxious, and we circle around and we circle around. The next one is that if my child has issues with anxiety, my child is doomed. There is no forever sentence. There is no, if they cannot make it to Cub Scouts, he won't be able to make it to college. That is a fear that we have as parents, that, wow, this thing now is going to mean some big thing in the future. And that's just not true. The vast majority of our kids and teens who have anxiety end up doing very well with support. We can come in and provide that support right now. Because my child does not ride the bus, or because my child is afraid to be in the school play, doesn't mean they're never going to have a job and have a family and be independent. But sometimes our minds make those big jumps, but they're just not true. And the last thing I want to share, and I heard this shared recently by a play therapist. If you have limited resources for counseling, use them for yourself first. If you have anxiety, you will absolutely affect the atmosphere of your home if necessary, right? On an airplane, the oxygen mask drops from the ceiling and they tell you, put your mask on first. Because what good will it do if you're passed out on the floor and you cannot put that oxygen mask on that child? Our kids desperately need us to be our healthiest self of us. I just want to encourage you in this. It may be the most important thing you can do for your child's anxiety is for you to make sure you're practicing good self-care, not just because your child needs a healthy adult in their life, but also because you're worth it. And God has created your life to be lived abundantly. All right, let's take a look at 6 possible reasons our kids might be anxious. There's more, but here are 6 pretty common ones that might help us to just explore. Why is my child anxious? Well, it could be genetics. And I don't even necessarily mean genetics as in it was passed down. I just mean something happened when your child was born, when your DNA and your husband's DNA and everything came together and divided and split and everything that it does that we learned about in our high school science classes, your child was prone to anxiety. Okay, sometimes it just happens and there's nothing really beyond it than that. Some of us just have a genetic propensity for anxiety. The next is a history of trauma. If your child was in a car accident, I would absolutely expect them to be anxious about getting in cars. If your child accidentally got locked in a room, I might expect them to have signs of claustrophobia. If your child had something really bad happen at school, I would expect them to have anxiety around school. So if your child has had a history of trauma, so an acute trauma is a trauma that happens one time, that would be those things I was just talking about. You just want to talk them through, help your child continue to make sense of that story until it loses some of that emotional charge, and then you'll see that anxiety back off. If their history of trauma was chronic, perhaps you have a child who's joined your family who has a chronic history of abuse or neglect or sexual abuse, absolutely get that child involved with some professionals who can really help that child make sense of that extensive history of abuse while you support them in the home. Next, some kids are sensitive. Some kids are more sensitive to the environment around them. They're more sensitive to what other kids say. They're more sensitive to how the teacher looks at them. And studies have shown us that sensitive kids make fantastic adults. So if you have that sensitive kid, don't think that because your kid is struggling in this particular thing in 3rd grade or 10th grade, that they're going to struggle when they're 30. Actually, research tells us opposite. Research tells us that sensitive kids grow into some amazing adults. Next is the fear of separation. And this is a really big one. Our kids' biggest need is to have attachment. So when they face separation, absolutely, we're going to see anxiety. Are some kids more afraid of separation than others? Absolutely. But just know that if there's a separation that can be avoided, that may help really kind of bring down your child's anxiety. Next is, I covered it up with my face. The next is kids being overscheduled. We have some pretty high goals for our kids here. And sometimes our goals for them are beyond what is healthy for them. They've got something every night of the week and they're trying to get their homework done. And honestly, sometimes our kids, they're overscheduled, and that overscheduled sense brings anxiety. They have no margin in their life for things like regeneration and repair. And then last is technology. There's all kinds of research out about technology, that kids use more technology now than ever. I just saw a study that suggested that by the time you and I are 70, we will have watched between 7 and 10 years of television. That makes me anxious right there. Like, oh no, I cannot waste that much of my life. Technology, we're not going to throw technology out the window and never use it. Technology is something that actually, it blesses our lives. It allows me to stay in contact with my children who are off at college in ways that I couldn't stay in contact when I was in college with my mom. It allows my high school age kids to let me know they're on their way home and where they are. There are some real blessings to technology. If you just take one step, I would just say, try to guard some bedtime space for technology free. Because when we use technology, I know you've heard this, right before bedtime, we mess with our circadian rhythm that messes with our cortisol levels of morning and nighttime. And it really messes with our whole schedule. So consider trying to just pull back a tiny bit on the amount of technology that you may have going on in your home. Okay, so let's move into what we can do. Let's start with a physical basis of nutrition, hydration, and sleep. Always work on connection. Remember, separation is very difficult for our kids. And start with the experience and then address thinking. So here's what this looks like. If I know that my kids are experiencing anxiety within their bodies, I want to start with the experience. Here are just some ways that we can help bring down that activation in the body. Tight hugs, movement, cortisol in our bodies, when we're just sitting and it pools within our bodies, it can cause issues. When we move around, for some kids, it's going to be run around the house. For some kids, you can call it ants in the pants, and you almost just shake and you move it and you disperse it. And it not only does it help kind of break up some of the cortisol, but it's releasing all kinds of other good chemicals that are going to help that feeling within our body go away. That's what our kids don't like. They don't like that feeling of anxiety. Movement, so important. Humming and singing also are shown to help relieve the feelings of stress. Breathing, and think of opening up. When we are in a closed position, again, that kind of traps cortisol in our body. And when we can open up, we release that and we can experience refreshment in our body. Butterfly hugs. You can have your kids just give themselves a butterfly hug like this. Just tap. Okay, they can do this by themselves. You can do it with them. And fidgets. And one of my favorite fidgets is something fun like this, something visual that your child can have in their hand. And then you're just going to encourage them to breathe while they watch the colors fall. And the truth is, breathing is amazing. Breathing is so key, but it's not as simple as saying, hey, take 3 deep breaths and then everything is going to be okay. It really takes more like 15 minutes for a nervous system to be able to calm down from a state of alarm. So 3 breaths is going to help a lot, but it's not going to be the end of the story. Be there to help your kids for 15 minutes if you can. Help them move through some of these experiences to help bring down the experience that they're feeling in their body. Now, I have some cognitive strategies I want to share as well, but I just want to share that cognitive strategies, without helping our kids work with what they're experiencing in their bodies, really aren't going to do anything, because until I've helped my child calm their body, their brains are still stuck in fear brain, and cognitive strategies aren't going to get them anywhere. So once we have our kids regulated, here are just a few cognitive strategies that we can use to help them think through the experience. Telling the story, always a great idea. Speak what you're feeling. Tell the story of what you're worried about. And for younger kids, drawing is a beautiful way to do this. Have them draw out the thoughts and the experiences that they're having. The next one is to practice giving more weight to the positive than the negative. And we have a negativity bias as human beings. We tend to think more negative thoughts, and we tend to remember negative experiences more, which means we have to intentionally work to give thought to the positive. For the child who's afraid to ride the bus, remember how much fun you had that one time. You laughed with your friend on the bus, and you got to school at the same time as everybody else, and you all were making jokes. Consciously remember those things to give weight to the positive. The next, sometimes it's helpful to have kids talk worst case scenario. Now, not in extreme cases where kids are worried about things like death and such, but perhaps for the child who's worried about trying out for the soccer team, right? And the worst case scenario is they don't make it. And what would be the worst thing about that, right? My friends might think that I'm not very good. And what would be the worst thing about that? Then they wouldn't want to be my friend anymore. And as you start having kids kind of process what the worst case scenario is, then you can kind of step back and think about what is the probability of that? Like, do you really think Johnny will stop being your friend because you don't make the soccer team? And you can start connecting some dots between the probability of something happening that to them is the worst case scenario. And then the last idea is, as we normalize anxiety, to let our kids know, you know what, I recognize there are things you're worried about. There's things I'm worried about. Let's create a worry box. And from time to time, we go and we open that box. And that might sound crazy to actively look at the things we're worried about. But what we're saying is that, hey, I'm in a relationship with anxiety. I know this is real. I'm going to go to it right now and look through these things that I'm worried about. And then we're going to have a time of shutting the lid and saying, okay, those are there. We know they're there. Let's move on to another activity. And you kind of put some symbolic space between yourself and between your worries. These cognitive strategies tied together with the strategies for the body, I just hope that together with the awareness of what your child is experiencing and the extreme normalcy of what they're experiencing, right? Reframing that experience of anxiety as something that's common and even good, as opposed to something that's terrible. I hope that knowledge and information blesses you. It blesses your family. It blesses those that you work with as you continue to try to be that healing adult in the presence of the life of your children. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to joining you perhaps in another session in the future.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I think Julie unpacked a lot in that session there on anxiety. We were talking amongst ourselves while we were watching a little bit there. There was just a lot that she covered. We'd love to take some time and talk about some questions. We've had a few in the chat already. If you haven't gotten a question out there that you have, or you think of one as we're talking, please share them, and I'll be sharing some of those questions with us here. I gave Beth and Harold a peek at the video a couple days ago, so they had some questions prepared. So I know Harold's got something that he kind of want to pose to Julie based in this. So I'm going to let him kick it off, and we'll just keep going around here for a while.
Sure. Julie, thanks for sharing it, because I know that anxiety plays a big part in our family dynamics, and I just wonder how much you can let anxiety kind of control what's happening in your home or manipulate the situations.
That's a great question, and one that I hear a lot. So I'll absolutely say kids can manipulate. As their parents, hopefully we can start to really have a good eye for when is this child's anxiety accompanied by the bodily things that we're looking for. That's one of our clues to know, like, is this a show for me? Or do I see kind of the clenched fists and the breathing and the dilated pupils? That helps me know, that's a clue for me at least, that, okay, this is actually an entire situation happening. But so manipulation, a lot of parents have a fear about our kids. If they manipulate now, are they going to manipulate forever? And is this a strategy they'll have forever? Manipulation is a strategy that comes out of fear. It comes out of fear. And what manipulation is I don't know if I can count on these adults to meet my needs. I'm going to have to figure out how to meet my own needs, and so I'm going to manipulate the situation. So for our kids who have high anxiety and they have real fear around certain situations, they very well may resort to manipulation because they're afraid of having to confront something they don't feel like they're ready for. So I try to say, if you have doubt, have grace. Have grace and give your child space. Always help them regulate first. Whenever we have a highly anxious child, before we use words, we want to use our bodies and our regulated state to help them regulate. And then we come back with the words and talk about what was going on, kind of become a detective around that. But it's a super common fear. We want our kids to have good strategies, not manipulation. But until they have those other strategies, they keep going to some of those maladaptive ones that they may have brought with them out of hard places. Yeah.
It's really good. It's really good. I know one of the questions we had on Facebook that kind of came in midway through was even in this sense of kind of, as we're looking at anxiety, how do you kind of have a sense that, hey, is this anxiety, is this maybe also a sign of some deeper needs that a kid might have that we might need to think about? Autism or special needs spectrum issues, like when, how can we maybe tell some differences? Is there ways we can do that?
Yeah.
In that sense?
So in little ones, right, when autism starts to show itself when our kids are pretty young, there might be some crossover in symptoms, and I would say we would want to get a professional involved to help us take a look at that. We want to take a look at, like, are there triggers? And as we start to categorize, when do we see these things happening? I think the professionals will be able to say, like, okay, no, this is anxiety, I'm finding some triggers here. Or actually, this is an autism issue, and we're going to want to look at some different strategies. But I think we do want to get a professional involved when they're little, if that is our concern.
Yeah, that's good. Beth, I know you had some good questions too.
I know personally, all too often, the biggest lie that I believe from Satan is that the way that things are going now with my child and with me and my relationship with my child are the way that it will always be.
Yes.
And so, question for you is, how, as the caretaker, the parent, how can I rid myself of that fear brain and adopt a brain that's filled with hope and that spiritual, biblical piece of a follower of God? How do I will myself to have hope for the future?
It's so interesting. I just did some research on the idea of hope, and it's absolutely tied to imagination. So if you can imagine a positive future, that instills hope. I think it's the same for our kids. A lot of kids who come from maybe histories of neglect or abuse, they bring this shame story with them. they very often believe if bad things happened, it was because of me. I'm not worthwhile. I'm not lovable. I'm not cute enough. I'm not smart enough. They have all of these things they bring with them into our homes. And so part of our having hope for their better future gives them also the bravery to have hope for their better future. And I think just how each of us, like we accept Christ, we begin this process of transformation that takes time. I think as parents, we do sometimes worry if we don't see a transformation in a certain amount of time, is it going to happen? And I just encourage you, even from the stories in my own home, that I was at that exact point. I had days where I thought, holy cow, it's never going to happen. I have failed here. And yet God redeemed it beautifully in His time. So I encourage you to keep hope, keep imagining what they can be. And I think that there's actually a wonderful quote that says, when we treat children as that which they can be, we help them become which God created them to be.
That's good.
Yeah.
Man, that's really good.
That's good.
That's really good. Well, one question we got here from Holly on Zoom is really about kiddos that are experiencing anxiety, and it's really coming out, manifesting itself in bad dreams. That this is the place where they're seeing it.
Yep.
And any strategies you can suggest or think about for kind of addressing this?
Yeah, and Holly, that's a great question. You've probably heard this before, but that bedtime routine, super important. We've had a bit of that too in our house, the bad dreams and even the night terrors and things. One strategy I might add to what we've heard, like a high protein snack before bed, maybe you've heard that idea, have a routine. One other idea is to keep a journal next to the bed and spend time before bedtime giving gratitude. No matter how the day went, we don't need to look back and think over the hard situations or any of that. Just give thanks. And there are actually some really cool research articles that show that giving thanks actually helps our bodies heal and helps us have a peaceful night's sleep. So that might be one practical thing to try, just that journal of gratitude.
That's really good. I like that. That's really cool. That's really cool. One that just came in from Devin on Zoom that I think is a really interesting question. A lot of what you talk about are some coping strategies and some things that often can take some time.
Yeah.
But in the midst of the anxiety and the crisis moment, what are some things that might help de-escalate the situation? So this came from Devin in Zoom. I think that's a really good question.
It's a really good question.
How do you address it in the moment?
Yep. We were talking, even when the video was on and we were sitting here, we were talking about how important, our regulation is in an adult. So we need to keep our own emotional state as healthy as can be. A dysregulated adult can't regulate a dysregulated child. So the number one tool we have to help our kids regulate is our relationship and our presence. So we get close, and we get close with our calmness. And as we get close, and we start breathing in regulated states, we might rub their back in a regulated state. We physiologically influence their body to calm down. So before we even need words, right, we just start with our closeness. When my kids were little, if they were on the floor, I would get on the floor right next to them, wherever they were, whatever situation they were in, we would just join them, spend time calming down, get a snack, get a drink. We need to help our kids come down out of that highly emotional state, because that highly emotional state that means that their amygdala is firing. And if your amygdala is firing, you're just in survival mode. So you're not thinking, you don't have impulse control, you're not able to make plans. Really the only thing you can do is calm down. And I think I mentioned in the video, if I didn't, I always like to tell parents that the idea of hey, just take a couple deep breaths and you'll calm down, that's great, but it really takes our brains about 15 minutes to come down from that full alarm state. So it's not, don't think just 3 breaths and you've done it and you're going to move on. Plan on 15 minutes of just that calm space. That's actually how long it actually takes us to really calm down. Wow. So it could be that maybe we're just not giving it enough time,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, And giving more grace, giving more opportunity in that moment.
Absolutely.
We actually see this, like and my wife is way better at practicing the breathing strategy with our kids than I am. But she'll actually, you'll see them like when they are upset and she's holding them, they'll take the big breaths themselves.
Yep.
And that's something we've done. We've suggested, hey, we need you to take a big breath. And now like you can hear them do it. They're at 5 and 6, so that's working for them. I'm going to go the other end of the spectrum.
Good. Okay.
Jason and Nicole, who are watching us on Facebook, asked, hey, what about older kids? And many of us, we talked about, you guys have kids in college, heading off to college and in college and thinking about the anxiety and the anxious moment. How do we help those kids when we're not there to co-regulate with them? These are some strategies they need to build up themselves for dealing with the world they're about to face.
Once my kids were about 15, 16, we would actually sit down together and discuss what works for them. And we would make sure they had tried different things, because what works for you doesn't work for me, and we're all different. So once they were a little bit older and they were because they would have anxiety sometimes at a sleepover or at a soccer game, like you're saying, times that I wasn't around. We talked about it, and we actually had a plan, like a little plan here, and some of my kids needed it more than others. But like for one daughter, music was just really important. So we just made sure that she had this bonus set of earbuds in her backpack so that she could listen to music if she became anxious. And that was kind of like her secret strategy. For other kids, it's doing things like chewing gum, something like good work in your mouth, like chewing gum calms down. But we need a plan, really. Each kid needs their own plan because we're all so different. And as you become aware of your plan, then you're like, okay, I remember what works for me, and I can try that. Thankfully, with all of the challenges of technology, one of the beauties is that often you can get a hold of somebody. So that's one of the beauties, I think, of technology. And like when I went to college, I couldn't call my mom. So, my kids who are in college, I've got 4 kids in college. And to know that we can still be in a relationship helps. It's actually one of the great things about technology, even though I know there's some difficult things, because really the best thing we can do is be in relationship. That also brings me to the idea of our relationship with the Lord, right? We teach them that God is actually the one who will never let you down, who will never leave you, right? So using prayer as a way to regulate it's so important for our Christian walk, and it's something that our kids can start to learn to take that for themselves.
Yeah. This is really good. I know one of the things we were talking about in the break, kind of when we clicked off the video, that I thought was really interesting. You guys were mentioning imagination, and that this is a kind of a thing that you kind of see a lot in your kiddos. What does that look like sometimes, and what do you think that is as far as a strategy sometimes for the kids in your all's homes?
Yeah, for us, it's like imaginary friends that are from books and stuff, and kind of acting out these scenarios and talking about how Harry Potter did this, and I was here and he did this to me, or
Yeah.
So it can be hard because you feel like, can you just please join us in this world? But I think as we were talking, it's really a strategy.
Yeah.
For dealing with anxiety, I think.
It's a calming and comfortable place to be.
Yeah.
So it's a place that they can kind of go and self-soothe even. Yeah, we were even mentioning, right, like in my imaginary world, if I'm that connected to this great place, my brain actually releases things like serotonin and dopamine and things that make me feel calm. So we could see why our kids would use that as a strategy to kind of combat anxiety, because it makes them feel better. We talked about how we think of anxiety as connected to faulty thoughts. It is, but we experience it in our body first. We know we're anxious because our body tells us first, and it's that feeling that we're trying to help our kids learn to tolerate a bit. That's why we talk about being in relationship with anxiety. We actually really need to learn to tolerate that a little bit, and also learn how to regulate through it, because it's a part of life. It's God made us with this system for a reason, and we need to learn what it looks like to have this active in our lives.
Yeah, I think we've talked around this a little bit, but I think too, what we're kind of just in pointing that out, I think again, that kind of imaginative world, there are places where that anxiety can get expressed in at least neutral, if not positive ways, right? That's not exactly a negative aspect, but I know Andrew, who is watching us on Facebook, asked about, what about more kind of negative, anxious behaviors that you're seeing that are kind of harmful and challenging? What are maybe some of those things that we can notice? I know you talk a lot about kind of some of the body things we see, but what are some of the negative, anxious behaviors we might want to look for and recognize? And what are some maybe helpful alternatives that we can offer? Which a lot of the strategies you offer in there, I think, go to this. But
well, unfortunately, there's a lot of maladaptive ways of coping with anxiety that become almost compulsive. Biting, like nail biting, even to biting on skin, and like even hair pulling. Cutting is probably one of the extremes. Like when our kids cause themselves that little bit of pain, whether it's like the hair or even the head banging or the cutting, it releases adrenaline. And what that does is it makes those feelings go away. We were just talking about what I want is the feelings to go away. So most maladaptive strategies, if not all of them, involve releasing something to make that feeling go away. It can be hard to get our kid to let go of that because it works immediately, as opposed to let's try breathing, let's go for a walk. That is part of almost like delayed gratification. Like for adults, it's maybe like, hey, don't have that alcohol. Let's try this other strategy to feel better. Well, it takes longer. And the interesting thing is the ability to postpone gratification, or the ability to put off our needs, is a prefrontal cortex ability. And when our kids are in high stress, they're back here, they don't have the ability to think like, this is a better decision than this, I just need to feel good now. So what I would suggest to that question is when our kids are not anxious, that's when we practice. So when our kids aren't anxious, we practice all of the strategies to work to start to build those pathways so it'll be a little bit faster when they need them. And we practice when they're calm so that we have it when they're anxious.
Yeah. Probably something that we should practice as parents too.
I'm pretty sure.
I think I have a bad habit of like going for those easy fixes. Like you said, those easy fixes, right? When I'm high anxious, like I'm going for the cupcake and the donut.
Absolutely.
Because that makes me feel a lot better than going for a walk.
Yeah.
It's a faster strategy.
Yep. So our alarm brain makes decisions that matter in the next 15 seconds. Like that's it. So in the next 15 seconds, right, I eat this cupcake, I feel better. Tomorrow, I'm going to feel like trash because I'm like, dang it, I did it again. But in the next 15 seconds, I'm going to feel better. It's the same with our kids. It's the same. Like they need to feel better somehow.
Yeah. They've got to have it, so they're looking for that quick strategy.
Yep.
One that came in earlier as well that I think is just another question to kind of get at is, as we're thinking about anxiety, I mean, a lot of what we've talked about are some strategies and some things we think about anxiety in our homes and some of the things we're seeing as parents. But for a lot of our kids, anxiety comes out in school.
Yeah.
And so what are some things you would say, hey, how do we address the anxiety and the anxiousness that can happen in school settings for our kids?
Yeah, hopefully as a parent, you're forming an alliance with your teaching staff. And sometimes as a parent, that means we have to go after it. Like we have to really advocate for our children to make sure, hey, if my kid needs a break, if they need water, if they need bathroom, all those things that are kind of regulated, add anxiety to our kids because they don't know if they have access to be able to feel better like they do at home, right? At home, like, of course I can go to the bathroom, get a drink, get up and take a walk, probably play for a while. The feeling of that might not be available to me is another whole layer of anxiety. So we really have to form an alliance with the teacher to make sure the teacher understands he's not manipulating you. That goes back to it's a fear that teachers have. Does he really need to go to the bathroom twice? Yeah, he might, because when you feel anxious, your bladder relaxes. Like they need some education and they need to know, hey, our kids aren't just trying to manipulate you. They're just trying to feel safe. But that really is going to happen adult to adult. And then on the child strategy, of course, we still try to teach them the techniques like the hug or there's all kinds. There's so many. A magic mustache you can teach your kids. He's got pressure points. grabbing their chair. There's all kinds of things you can teach your kid. However, if they're highly anxious, they're really going to need the alliance of the teacher involved. They might be beyond the place where they can just do it themselves at the chair. They're going to need the teacher's help, so we need to advocate for them.
Yeah. I think it's really good. It's really good. I hope that you guys are still with us, enjoying this conversation tonight. I think this has been so interesting, so helpful to kind of address anxiety in so many ways. We'd love to answer another question or two if you guys have them here. But if we haven't already, I haven't been able to check yet. Hopefully our leaders have posted the link to our door prize in the chat. I forgot to remind them. That's my fault. I wasn't paying attention to my little schedule in front of me. But if you guys haven't done that, if you'll do that, we'd still love to give away another door prize tonight. But while we're waiting for that to come in, Julie, will you share a little bit about Trauma Free World and just some of the resources? One of the great things having you on here is there's a lot more that your organization can offer that are online resources anybody that's watching can get to.
Yeah, absolutely. Harold, I appreciated you mentioned your oldest was adopted in like the 90s, and my oldest was adopted in 2000, and I can't tell you how many times I say to myself, I wish I would have known then what I know now. So I train foster and adoptive parents because I said that to myself. I wish I would have known then what I know now. So Trauma Free World has resources that are aimed at helping caregivers become trauma informed. So it's appropriate for social workers and teachers and such, but it really is at the caregiver level for those of us who have kids and we're with them day in and day out. And we have training around just how do we understand how our kids' bodies and brains have been affected by trauma. Even the kids who came to us as infants come with a history that we need to understand. And then we talk about things like how do we help our kids have felt safety? How do we help with big emotions and big behaviors, which of course all of us are like, yes, thank you, sign me up for that. We have that in our home. And training around how to support the birth family and the child's essential connections, along with self-care, which is so important because we cannot be that regulated adult if we are not practicing self-care. So at the Trauma Free World website, which is traumafreeworld.org, you'll just see a whole menu of different training options that really speak to these issues. And we have training that in very, very intense, that's 18 hours, all the way down to 3.5-hour intro kind of courses to just 1 hour to 30 minutes. So we really try to have it be bite-sized, but also have a really intensive deep dive for people who just feel like I really want to understand this. So all of those resources are available on the website.
Yeah. I did get one more good question, so I don't want to leave it because I think that's a really good question. But somebody just posted a question in about medication. When we think about anxiety, when we've talked a lot about this, and we even were talking as a group, one of the things you point out in there is that, a third of teens are diagnosed with anxiety disorders, but we know it's wider than that, right?
Yeah.
There's an even wider group. But as we're seeing anxious behaviors, we're offering these strategies. At what point do you think, hey, this is a point where we go talking to a doctor or specialist about medication as a way that we need to think about it?
Yeah, if anxiety is interrupting daily life to the point of your child is having problem with being social with friends, going to school, some of those things that could and should be a part of their everyday life, talk to their doctor. I've seen lots of kids benefit, even if it's medication just for a time to come down a little bit to the point where you can learn some strategies, right? If our kids are so in alarm all of the time that they can't learn strategies, medication might be a great way to just help kind of calm them down until they can get their feet under them, until they can get in therapy perhaps, or you just do some work as a family. And again, it doesn't mean it's going to be forever. It might be, which is honestly fine. But I think once their daily functioning is really starting to be impacted, it's probably time to talk to their doctor.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, Beth and Harold, any takeaways you guys take from tonight? Like, hey, this is something I'm going to hold on to from kind of what we've talked about, what Julie mentioned to us. Anything you guys think? This is the thing that really stuck with me as an important thing, Beth.
I really appreciated how you said that we all have anxiety. Anxiety is something we will always have a relationship with, and that puts us at the same level as our kids.
Yeah.
And it gives us an even platform where we can speak with them. That anxiety is necessary for us to stay alive.
Yep.
And so it's what we do with that anxiety and how it stays a positive thing and doesn't interrupt our life. And I really will take that and use that in my own family as a way to connect in that relationship with my own kids. So thank you.
You're welcome. Normalizing it, by letting our kids know, right? This is normal. We all have this, and you see me dealing with it, and I see you dealing with it, and we're gonna succeed.
It's good. Harold,
Yeah, I think for me, understanding that it's a response in the body first.
Yeah.
Like I all the time go to here, let me explain this, and here's how you need to think about this situation, and it's not very effective, and I can kind of see why now.
It's not very effective for a lot of people. It's especially not effective for our kids. I think that's just the place we have to realize. It's like we've got to let everybody have a breath and take a break and get to a place where then they can listen and then they can hear. But it's hard to do. All right, so we've got a lot of people that entered into our door prize. So we want to give that away tonight. So I'm going to put Beth on the spot. Beth, pick me a number between 45 and 95, and we will see who wins.
45 and 95.
45 and 95. Pick a number, any number between 45.
55.
55 is our winner, and 55, I have to scroll over here. Chris and Taryn Millette, who are here, part of our Blankenbaker campus. We're so happy that you guys won our door prize. We're going to be sending you a dinner gift card. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is great. Julie, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Such great information.
It's great to be here.
So appreciated it.
You're welcome.
This was so great. This is just night 2. We've got one more night to go. Tomorrow night, we'll be right back here. Tomorrow night, if you're watching us on Zoom, please come back, but we'll just be on Facebook and YouTube. We won't be on the Zoom platform tomorrow. But we're going to be talking about marriage. And I think what we've talked about tonight, a lot of things about regulation and regulating yourself as a parent. Guess who your best help in regulating is? Your spouse. And that's why it's so important. Like, if you guys are going to be successful as a foster and adoptive family, you're going to need some support. And a lot of times that support is going to come from your spouse and from your partner. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff we're going to talk about. So my wife Kelly and I are going to be here tomorrow night sharing some of our thoughts about marriage, not by any means projecting that we have a perfect marriage by any means. Kelly will tell you that's not true. We definitely have some stuff to work on. But we want to just have a conversation. And so we want you to join us again tomorrow night on Facebook, on YouTube. Come again. We're going to have another door prize. And for those of you who have already been here the first 2 nights, if you're here all 3 nights, we have one more door prize we'll give out on Thursday for the folks that showed up all 3 nights. So we're so glad you're here. Plug in, get connected to some of our other opportunities that are coming up. The Mom's Bible Study we mentioned before, the fellowship groups. There's lots of ways that you can get connected. And please check out Trauma Free World. It's some great resources for you there. So we're so excited that you were here tonight. Come back tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, for our last night of Family is Forever. Thanks so much.